This video is brought to you by Movie, a curated streaming service dedicated to elevating great cinema from all around the globe. Get a whole month free at movie.com/filmfatales. Messy young women. We've gone through a lot of phases of art as a culture. We've gone through the Renaissance, Romanticism, Modernism, Postmodernism, and now we've entered a new era. The messy young woman. The messy young woman trope has emerged lately, for better or for worse. In sickness and in health, people are talking about entering their Fleabag era, eating their girl dinner. Sally Rooney and Atessa Moshfegh have book talk in an absolute chokehold, and Olivia Rodrigo's Bad Idea Ride is blasting through the car radios of every young woman. It seems like we've made a collective decision to transition to the third act of Carrie. We spent too long being confined by cultural expectations, and now we're burning them to the ground. I am obsessed with messy young woman art, whether it's literature, film, TV show, lipstick stains on a red wine glass. I am for it. And as a film girly, I wanted to look at some of the iconic messy young women on film. So I'm going to look at 3 films: Frances Ha, The Worst Person in the World, and Shiva Baby, and how they portray this kind of coming of adulthood, this kind of coming of age that happens in your 20s. I'm going to satiate your inner Fleabag and tell you what to do.
So just tell me what to do.
So don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, ring the bell like Quasimodo, follow my Instagram, give me love, give me validation, because what are we if not our accomplishments? And that's exactly what we're going to be talking about today. For a teeny tiny little primer on the coming of age genre, I'm not going to go into all of it, but I'm just going to highlight some key points to show how recent films have kind of shifted the focus of traditional coming of age films. Coming of age films have typically focused on the transition from teenager to young adult. Think Rebel Without a Cause, The Breakfast Club, Ferris Bueller, Dead Poets Society, Perks of Being a Wallflower, Lady Bird. They're all kind of some of the most popular and quintessential coming of age and all center teenage characters. But the coming of age story isn't constricted to any one genre or indeed any age. More and more we see the phrase coming of age applied to films about childhood, tween years, cannibalism, a cappella, dystopian revolutions, gay. Despite my love for cannibalism and girl and forest genres, recently I've been drawn to the coming of age films that center women being lost in their 20s. This is a theme that's captivated filmmakers and audiences alike ever since The Graduate came out in 1967, a film that told the story of Benjamin, who was recently graduated from college and drifting through the ennui and excitement his hometown has to offer, never quite finding satisfaction. 30 years later, Reality Bites came out and spoke to the challenges of Generation X, the dissolution of the American dream and the nuclear family, the AIDS crisis, the tension between following your passions and being practical in your career, and the desire to retain your individuality instead of selling out to corporations.
I'm not going to work at the Gap, for Christ's sake, okay? No. What I meant was, I didn't mean anything.
Sorry. Oh, how stupid of me to try to drag you down to my level.
Vicky.
The coming of age genre, like all art, is constantly evolving to reflect contemporary concerns and interests. Over the past 10 years, there's been a rise in film and TV that center on women in their 20s who have no idea what they want or what they want to do with their lives. In the cultural context in which these films are made, with more access to education and birth control, more career options and financial freedom, women have more choices than ever as to what they can do with their lives. Millennials and Gen Z are either having kids and getting married later in life, or they're not doing those things at all. Women are no longer universally expected to have children, and if they do, they can still be a girl boss, CEO, she has it all, she does it all queen. Previously, straightforward and conventional life paths like school, college, job, success, or date, marry, house, baby have been disrupted, both because there's not the same desire and expectations to do those things, but also because we don't have the same financial security that our parents and our grandparents did. So it's unlikely that we will be popping out 3 kids and having a lovely little house in the suburbs by the age of 25. The shift is both liberating and confusing, because when you can do anything, how are you supposed to know what you want to do? And millennials especially have grown up with the rhetoric of girl power. girls can do anything, they can be anything they want, and kind of like the Barbie movie speaks to, when you're told that you can be anything and you don't want to live up to this extraordinary expectation, then you can end up feeling like a failure, or you can feel kind of confused and lost. And that's what the films I'm going to look at speak to, because your 20s can be a time of growth and transformation, transition and change, stagnancy and uncertainty all at once. It's messier than other life stages because we no longer have the study structure of school or college. We don't have parents or teachers looking over our shoulders and guiding us in the right directions. The rug has completely been pulled out from under us, and there's no clear path or milestones that we're supposed to hit. We also no longer have the easy parameters of where we're from or what we studied to base our identity on. So the genre often tracks this search for our identity and all the kind of ways that we might try to form a sense of self. The films disrupt the straightforward coming-of-age story and instead kind of meander through random snippets of life, following these messy young women who don't get any less messy as the film goes on. But before we get too messy, I want to talk about today's sponsor, which is Mubi. This video is brought to you by Mubi, and even if Mubi didn't sponsor my videos, I would still use them and love them. I've been using them since my college days, and I still use them. Recently, I actually went to a screening of the film Passages, and I didn't even realize that it was like a preview screening, and I went and I saw like a Mubi thing on the screen, and I was like, oh my god, it's my friends. Mubi is the streaming platform for film buffs, with everything from old school classics to modern art house cinema. Each film in Mubi's catalog is hand-picked, and I think you can really feel that when you're looking through the selection, because it doesn't feel like titles are being thrown at you by AI or just a randomly generated algorithm. And I think now more than ever, it's really important to foreground the humanity behind films. And I think Mubi is a really great platform to do so. It's a platform that really encourages you to think about cinema and encourages you to try new things. Trust me when I say that you will be introduced to completely unique films that you probably never would have watched before once you start going through their catalog. Mubi is for lovers of great cinema and for people who don't know that they are lovers of great cinema yet. The Worst Person in the World and Shiva Baby are both on there. So 2 of the 3 films I'm discussing are now streaming on Mubi for UK and Ireland viewers. They also have a full coming of age collection called Growing Pains if you're interested in watching more of the genre. And as well as that, some of my favorite films like Close and After Sun are on Mubi, and a film that's next on my watch list, which is Boy by Taika Waititi, is on there, and I'm really excited to watch it. If you want to watch any of the films that I mentioned and more, if you want to rewatch the films that I'm talking about today, you can watch them all for free for 30 days at mubi.com/filmfatales. That is mubi.com/filmfatales for 30 days of great cinema at no cost to your wallet. Frances Ha is a 2012 film directed by Noah Baumbach and co-written by him and Greta Gerwig, and it stars Greta Gerwig as Frances Halliday. It follows the titular character as she struggles to find her feet in everything from career to housing after her best friend Sophie moves out to live with her fiancé Patch. She flits from apartment to apartment, trying to earn money to pay rent while pursuing her passion of being a professional dancer. And Sophie moving out coincides with Frances breaking up with her boyfriend because her boyfriend wanted her to move in with her and she said no. But ironically, the breakup with Sophie is a lot more impactful, and Frances even refers to it as a dumping. She talks about how she feels like a lesbian married couple.
This is the best night I've had since Sophie dumped me.
Frances and Sophie have such love and intimacy, and I just love seeing that in a female friendship because it's something that's normally reserved for romantic relationships on screen, and I just think it really captures the depth of female friendships. And once Frances sees Sophie kind of moving on to a new chapter of her life, it really throws her because she kind of thought that they would both be in this kind of messy young phase of life together forever. Frances is repeatedly offered avenues out of her situation, but she she repeatedly turns them down and chooses instead to cling to the past and stay in this box of her own design. For example, she is let go as a dance teacher and dancer from the dance company she works for, but she's offered a job as an administrative assistant, but she turns it down because she wants to be a dancer. And so instead, she spends the summer going back to her college and serving wine there at alumni events, and she's living in her dorm. And this kind of chapter of her life really emphasizes how much she's stuck in the past. Like, she's literally sleeping back in her college dorm instead of taking on a practical job and moving on with her life. And while she's pouring wine at one of these alumni events, Sophie and Patch are in attendance, and the contrast between the two just further underscores Frances's like arrested development. She tries to keep Sophie close, kind of pulling her back into the memories of their college days, but Sophie is able to move on and go home the next day, whereas Frances is still stuck there. The story is told in montages and vignettes illustrating the fragmented, unstructured nature of the transitory period that is your 20s. And the staccato, speedy pace also speaks to how, as you get older, time seems to slip by faster and faster, and you can blink and realize, oh my god, like I'm in my mid-20s, I'm in my late 20s, oh my god, I'm 59. The chapters are divided by Frances's apartments, again tapping into how early adulthood is marked by apartment hunts, apartment moves, stressing about rent, and again playing into the notion of kind of always moving, always bouncing around, not having a stable, steady, like rooted lifestyle. Frances is in a financial spot where she's not poor, she always has a roof over her head, she always has something to eat, but she's often broke in the sense that she can't afford to go out to dinner or out to the cinema as much as she wants with her friends. It speaks to a time when you're still finding your feet, you're still trying to establish a steady income that will allow for that level of comfort and luxury if you are lucky enough and have the privilege to reach those points. And financial standings are a major point of comparison at all stages in life, but I think especially in your 20s when you're starting to make things for yourself in a lot of cases. And like I said before, we don't have this same structure of like school or college or whatever to kind of like compare ourselves against. We can't be like, oh, what did you get in that test? Or I have this average, you have this average. So the kind of next best thing that is easily quantifiable is income. So we make these arbitrary barometers for success, like, do they have a good job? What's their apartment like? How much money do they earn? Are they in a relationship? And our sense of self-worth can change a lot according to all those variables.
Not every girl is as stable as me.
For Frances, like, she doesn't have a good, stable source of income. She is flitting from apartment to apartment and rarely able to afford anything, and she's not in a relationship. So it kind of seems like there's almost nothing going for her, and she feels so lost throughout the entire film.
I'm so embarrassed. I'm not a real person yet.
Yeah, aren't you a lot older than Sophie?
No, we went to college together.
You seem older.
I'm a couple months older.
Like, a lot older. But less, like, grown up. It's weird.
You will always be messy, and you will always look at yourself too much in the mirror.
And also, your 20s are so lonely, and I think this film really portrays that. There's a lot of times when the scenes start or end just with Frances alone in a room, and they kind of leave those empty spaces, that kind of breathing room.
Sometimes there were moments in plays when a character would just walk onto the set and they'd be alone for a while before the other person comes in and says, like, well, Harold called.
And it really emphasizes how you're spending a lot of time with yourself. A lot of your 20s is spent in a room by yourself. You're not surrounded by schoolmates, you're not surrounded by family or friends. You probably have coworkers, but it's not the same level of like community and companionship that you've had, and you can't just like text your friends at any moment to come hang out at the drop of a hat because now we have responsibilities. And I just like have to take a moment to appreciate Greta Gerwig in this role because she's absolutely fantastic. She captures this like charming awkwardness in her interactions, and her movements and flourishes capture the sense that Frances is a big kid, like yet to settle into her adulthood. She's clownish, she's uninhibited, she tries to see Puss in Boots in Paris.
Hello. When did Puss in Boots start?
The dinner party scene feels like watching a child among adults, trying to be funny but coming across as rude or brash. Gerwig talked about how for Frances's choreography, there's a lot of this controlled fall.
In this kind of dance. It's called release technique. It's a lot of falling, and it's a lot of almost like letting your joints and your skeleton fall and let like your knees slip out, and then your whole body follows it. And it's about using the momentum of the fall to get yourself back up.
And what is Frances Ha as a film if not watching a woman fall and pick herself back up over and over again? The film was shot on black and white film, and Baumbach has cited the influence of French New Wave directors like Godard. A film that you can take as a precursor to Frances Ha is Cleo from 5 to 7 by Agnes Varda. It follows a 2-hour snippet from the life of a young, successful singer named Cleo as she rambles around Paris, reckoning with her own mortality and awaiting medical test results. I also think on a deeper level, you can kind of read the black and white as like giving it this timeless quality and showing that like these struggles are not unique to the character of Frances. They're not unique to millennials. They have been going on, and they probably will be going on for a really long time. At the end of the film, Frances is working an admin role at the dance company and pursuing her passion of choreography on the side. She's moved from being a part-time kids ballet instructor and dance understudy to choreographing her own pieces. And she's moved from a background actor to an active director. But what's interesting is that all of the things that Frances has at the end of the film were available to her from the start. She could have had the admin role from the start, and she could have set up a stable life for herself from the start of the film, but she chose not to because she was clinging to the past. And it really shows how she's come to this kind of internal sense of peace and has let go of the past and also the kind of paralyzing expectations of the future. And it shows that like taking a practical job, I'm putting practical in air quotes because, you know, that's subjective, but how kind of this idea that you're giving up on your passion doesn't necessarily mean that you're giving up on your passion. And sometimes we have to take those practical roles in order to pay rent and like survive. And honestly, the only people who can afford to be artists, especially in like New York City, are like the rich. So if you are trying to do something in like a creative career, sometimes it's necessary to take those like practical jobs. And the film was kind of saying like that's okay. It doesn't have to be an all or nothing. It doesn't mean that you're a failure if you have to take a job as a waiter or as an assistant, a receptionist. None of those are personal failings, and you can still pursue your hobbies in your spare time. It's not a complete loss of identity, and the world's not going to crash down around you. The director of The Worst Person in the World, Joachim Trier, described The Worst Person in the World as a coming-of-age story for adults who still haven't grown up. And it's drawn a lot of comparisons to Frances Ha because of its kind of wandering, aimless, messy young women protagonists. The film is Norwegian, and it came out in 2021, and it opens with a montage of our protagonist Julia as she rapidly changes her course of study from medicine to psychology to photography, with some dabbling in writing. And like the opening montage, Julia spends the rest of the film flitting from kind of relationship to relationship, from place to place, and like Frances Ha, it gives this kind of vignette approach to being lost in your 20s. And she is pursuing photography and working at a bookshop part-time, but the root of the film was really in her romantic relationships. Over the course of the film, Julia goes through 2 relationships. Julia's first boyfriend in the film is Axel. He's a successful comic book artist, and he's in his mid-40s when Julia is in her 20s. Because of this vast age gap, Axel has reservations about starting a relationship with her initially. He says that he thinks that she will get bored and, you know, go off and want to find herself and leave him behind, whereas he is ready for kids and a family and to have his one person for the rest of his life. And then on a trip away with Axel's friends, who are also in their mid-40s and have kids, they get into a fight about having children. Axel is ready to have kids and Julia is not, and he asks her, what will it take for you to be ready? And Julia voices this kind of desire that is impossible to articulate. She says that she is just not ready and she wants to do something more. She doesn't know what, but she wants something more. And I think that kind of yearning for something more, but not even knowing what it is, it rings very true to being in your 20s and knowing that you want to do something, but not knowing what that something is. Julia compares her wandering life to Axel's successful career, and I think she is thrown off by his stability. So she ends up gravitating towards a man named Ivan, who is the polar opposite of Axel. He is a young barista, he doesn't want kids, and he's just kind of going with the flow. Similar to Frances Ha, Yulia seems to be quite privileged in her financial situation. She's not ever seen stressing about money. Especially in your early 20s, your personal identity is largely rooted in kind of what you study and what you do. And Yulia's career path gives her a lot of structure and identity, which is something common to a lot of people at our age. One of the first questions we often meet when we meet someone new is, what do you do? And it's a way of categorizing people, of setting up our expectations for their personality. And obviously work is important and a central part of our lives, but it isn't our whole lives. And when Yulia crashes a party and meets Ivan, she finds it refreshing that he doesn't ask those questions. But the traits that draw Yulia towards him in the first place end up as points of contention. His laissez-faire attitude and job at the cafe ends up becoming a lack of ambition in Yulia's eyes. Something interesting I find about this film is that Trier tracks how when you don't have a stable sense of self and a secure identity, you end up as a sponge for the people around you. Ivan's ex-girlfriend was a staunch yogi and environmentalist, so he went along with everything she did, even though it didn't make him happy. When he's with Yulia, he says he doesn't want kids, mainly due to worries about climate change. But then in the epilogue, we see him with a partner and a baby. And of course, people's wants and opinions can change over time. But I thought it was interesting that Trier kind of included all these facets of Ivan's character. And to add to the sense of aimlessness and being lost, Yulia at one point says that she feels like a spectator in her own life. She's expressing her lack of agency, but it also made me think of how through social media, we actually do create this dynamic. Like, we create this digital self that we curate and separate from ourselves, and then we end up kind of watching them play out as well. The film briefly engages with contemporary concerns around technology and how it plays into our psychology. Yulia is bombarded with a digital flood that leads her to quit her smartphone for an older one, something that doesn't last long, clearly, considering that in the opening scene she's using an iPhone. But we've all been there. I can't judge her for her fads. Instagram and Facebook are also included in the film in ways that feel very natural. It's not like, do you know when films make Book Face or Schmoogle instead of just having generic brand names? I understand it, but also just put them in. Just put them in. I think the crux of Yulia's personality identity crisis comes with her 30th birthday. She contemplates her maternal ancestors and what they've achieved by the age of 30. And in the absence of academic and career milestones, for example, Yulia dropped out of college and she's trying to pursue an art, which again doesn't have as many concrete milestones. Birthdays instead take on an added significance as a marker of time and progression. They become a time where we kind of take stock of where we are at life and compare it to this pressure to do something and make something with our lives, whether that's art, money, a difference, kids. And we get the sense that Yulia's biggest fear is time and the passage of time. And I think the freeze scene where everything around her freezes and she runs to be with Ivan, kind of embodies this fear and shows that she just wants time to stand still for a second. She wants to be free of the kind of pressure of time running out and the pressure of having to achieve something. And then during a mushroom trip, Yulia has images of her aging body and her holding a baby. So it's clear that she's reckoning with her mortality and also kind of this contemplation of legacy and kids and family. And then she accidentally gets pregnant. Her pregnancy, along with Axel's terminal cancer diagnosis, lead her to contemplate her future. Though she loses the baby, we see in the epilogue that she has a steady job and her own apartment. She's quit her habit of flitting from one person to another, presumably. We get no insight into her social life, her hobbies, any information beyond her career status, but given that the film started with her going through college majors, I do think it's a nice way to kind of come full circle by ending with her career. Yulia is never alone. She is a serial monogamist who very much roots her identity in her relationships, and we never see her with any friends. There's a moment when she first gets with Axel where she's talking about one of her female friends and how they're like acting off with her, and she's saying it's because she thinks that she's entered a new relationship. And I feel like Yulia could be one of those people that when they enter a relationship, they just completely disappear off the face of the earth and they no longer keep up their friendships. But there's no female friendships in the film, and this, along with the focus on the men in her life, has drew criticism. For example, Richard Brody, in his review for The New Yorker, criticized how we don't know anything about Yulia, we don't know anything about her public or professional life, we don't know anything about her interests, we don't know why she has kind of given up everything in her life to pursue photography. And it is definitely true that I think Yulia is a very kind of like underdeveloped, not fully three-dimensional character, and I think you could read it two ways. I think you could read her kind of lack of personality in a way as showing how we can cling to our romantic partners as a way to find ourselves, ironically. And I think that Trier challenges the romantic notion that if we just like find the one person, if we find our soulmate, that everything else in our life will fall into place. He said in an interview, "I'm more interested in characters and theme, and writing Yulia was my attempt at making an existential story told through the perspective of love, and how, in the very rational world that we live in, love is the one place where we're exposed to that negotiation between lack of control and intimacy that many people find very hard to navigate. And it is hard. It's hard to reveal yourself in close dynamics with someone for all genders." But that said, I do find criticisms like this from movies Raffaella Basili of Yulia's lackluster characterization equally persuasive. Basili writes, "She walks the streets of Oslo, stopping to stare out at the river. Framed in profile against the background of the city, Reinsve's sensitivity is deftly attuned to the kind of melancholy that accompanies a sense of disappointment in the self, a desire that something would happen that would make things finally fall into place. Though the sentiment is movingly familiar, Trier's constant fallback on this kind of evocation fails to fill out Yulia's character with any interests, aversions, or contradictions that can be particularly hers. The sentiment moves because it is so universal, but by solely relying on relatability, it loses the verve of more specific characterization. Whether you think it's a poorly fleshed out character or a storytelling device to emphasize Yulia's lack of identity, there is something to be said about how by the end of the film we know little about Yulia as a person. Something I found interesting in the discourse around this film is that some people really hated Yulia. Like, I saw people saying, like, she's a narcissist, she's a bitch, she cheats on everyone, and I'm not here to say that she's the most likable character in the world. But it is interesting how quick people are to villainize her and yet make endless excuses for the downright villainous behavior of characters like Don Draper and Walter White. Just interesting. Just something I noticed. Just interesting. Whether you endorse Yulia's behavior or not, whether you like her or not, she is just making mistakes, and those mistakes are part of life, and she learns from them, and she's grown by the end of the film. But she spends the whole film questioning her identity and revolving around her partners, but then she ends the film single, suggesting that she's either formed her own identity or she's formed some independence, and she recognizes that she doesn't need and want other people to like base her identity in. I'm interested to hear how you feel about Yulia's characterization in particular, so let me know in the comments if you've seen it, what you think of it. I made a full video on Shiva Baby a couple years ago when I was a little baby YouTuber. So if you want a more in-depth analysis, you can look at that, but I'm gonna analyze it here because I think it works as a really good point of comparison to the other two films. So forgive any repetition, but there's also fresh info here. Shiva Baby is the debut feature from writer and director Emma Seligman, who recently co-wrote Bottoms with Rachel Sennett, and she directed it, and I cannot tell you the amount of times I've googled Bottoms release date Ireland in anticipation. It's countless. I'm waiting. I'm biding my time. I'm going crazy. I cannot wait to see it. Anyways, Emma Seligman and Rachel Sennett have both really blown up since Shiva Baby. But Shiva Baby revolves around a soon-to-be graduated college student, Danielle, and Danielle is also a sugar baby. And after her morning business appointment, she goes to a Shiva where the majority of the film will take place. In case you don't know, a Shiva is a Jewish observance, which includes like a week-long mourning period following someone's passing. And at the Shiva, Danielle is not only bombarded with parental criticisms, nosy relatives, her ex-girlfriend, but who's that older man staring in the corner at Danielle? In horror, it's her sugar daddy Max. And oh wait, what's that I hear? A screaming baby? Whose baby is it? It's Max. And his wife, a wife and child Danielle knew nothing about. The Shiva descends into utter chaos in what I can only describe as an 86-minute anxiety attack-inducing shit show in the best way possible. And it takes a completely different approach to the other two films, one because it's on the same place and it is so insanely stressful, but also because it's about a Gen Z character. The film really forefronts Danielle's post-grad anxiety and the expectations of those around her. Shiva Baby feels like a psychological horror and a witty comedy all at once. From the moment Danielle arrives, she is subjected to an onslaught of questions, comments, remarks, from everything about her life and her babysitting job to her appearance. Her mother and other women repeatedly comment on Danielle's weight, and they speculate whether she has an eating disorder. They say she's lost weight, and I think this emphasis on her weight, in my opinion, shows like the community's preoccupation with appearance and, outward symbols of status. Danielle's relentlessly questioned about her studies and her career plans. Her answers are often met with blank stares and confusion.
What's your line of that you're interested in here in your field?
Well, it's sort of like like media, you know?
No.
She's changed her major at least a dozen times.
But you're studying business?
No, not business.
No. She's studying gender.
The business of gender. It's like gender business.
She does this fantastic program where you kind of design your own major. It's a little complex when it comes to finding employment, but she's doing terrifically.
Well, a confusion which makes sense given that Danielle herself has no idea what to do now that college is over.
I don't know what I'm gonna do.
Everything's gonna be fine.
In an interview with Variety magazine, Rachel Sennett says, "This movie shows that being a young woman is a horror movie. Nobody else at the Shiva is in a horror movie. When you're a young woman, there's all this pressure to be independent and sexually adventurous, but also to have a boyfriend soon. There's pressure to be skinny, but not too skinny. All these pressures come from different places, your family, society, your friends. You never even listen to what you want, but Danielle is in this situation where all of these things are butting heads. It's terrifying." And the film does an amazing job at conveying the sense of claustrophobia, both from being in this really tense situation, but also from the point of where Danielle is at in her life. She is physically barred from moving at some points. She is backed into corners. She's touched, groped, and basically interviewed as she moves throughout the house. In this movie interview, Emma Seligman talks about her crew and how they all work together to create this sense of claustrophobia. There's an amazing string score by Ariel Marks, which sounds like a horror film. The cinematographer Maria Rucci used an anamorphic lens that curves the frame to make it seem like the walls are caving in, and it kind of makes everything look a little bit distorted. Then the editor Hannah Park kind of took away that empty space in takes to kind of take the air out between people talking, and it does the opposite of what Frances Ha does. It's instead of feeling lonely, this film feels so overstimulating at every point. You can also see the influence of The Graduate here, not only in the similar subject matter, but with the long takes and the shaky handheld camera, all of which build the claustrophobic, anxiety-inducing atmosphere. Jewish identity and community is central to Shiva Baby, and it really informs its genre bending. Isaac Feldberg pointed out the film's play between humor and horror, and how it plays into a Jewish storytelling legacy. Felberg says, underneath all the best Jewish punchlines lies a wary acknowledgement of inevitable suffering. Laughing through the pain, employing humor as a self-defense mechanism, has long been the prerogative of Jewish comedians forced to contemplate the absurd horrors of anti-Semitism, that oldest hatred. In Shiva Baby, Seligman identifies a rather fascinating overlap between Jewish comedic tendencies and the mockery of existential suffering from which millennials draw so much of their own dark humor. Danielle attempts to regain a semblance of control by manipulating Max with her sexuality, but unfortunately her attempts are thwarted. Danielle doesn't sugar out of necessity because she has financial support from her parents.
You're not in our house. You're just on our payroll.
A great way to pay the bills, so.
Bills? You've never paid a bill in your life.
It seems instead she does this as a means of getting power and control. But as I highlighted in the video I already did on it, this power is revealed to be an illusion. Faced with the terrifying abyss of post-grad uncertainty, Danielle cashes in on her sexuality in the meantime, and talking about Danielle's sugaring, Emma Seligman says, "It feels really important to always create dynamic, complicated female characters who are handling the pressures being put upon them and acting on them either in ways that are good for them or bad for them, or empowering but that doesn't last long, or whatever it is." And I think that being a young woman in that position is such a messy time that I feel like a lot of people can relate to, where you are just throwing things at walls and seeing what sticks. The realization that her sugaring offered nothing but an illusion of control really sends Danielle into a spiral. Like the other films, comparison is again a theme in this film, with Maya, who is Danielle's ex-girlfriend, acting as a foil to Danielle. Maya is soon to be a law school student, and she's kind of picked the more stable career path, whereas Danielle has gone a pick your own adventure, create your own major route, where she's studying gender studies and is doing, I think, comedic videos in the meantime, which are very much belittled by the people at the Shiva. Maya also seems to be effortlessly mixing with everyone at the Shiva, while Danielle's attempts to socialize are painful and forced. And I also really appreciate how the film treats Danielle's bisexuality, because, again, it is something that is often used as kind of it's either dismissed as like, oh, it's a phase, they're experimenting, they're actually gay, or else it's treated as this kind of point of contention, of, more confusion, of adding to the kind of messiness of being young. But I appreciate how in the film Danielle is very much secure in her sexual identity, even if the people around her are uncomfortable.
No funny business with Maya.
What is that supposed to mean?
You know what it means. You're
Stop.
lucky I'm so open-minded.
Okay, yeah, you're...
I thought you were done experimenting.
You think everyone that's bi is experimenting. You don't know anything. You have zero gaydar.
You're gonna meet a great man. You're gonna fall in love.
And though Danielle's bisexuality and her ex-girlfriend and her sugar daddy kind of create points of conflict, it's not the root of all the conflict in the film, and her identity isn't the conflict. The coming of age isn't a coming of sexuality. It's just a facet of our character, and I just really appreciate that about the film. Something with all three films is that they either kind of have epilogues or moments of resolution at the end, but it's not all the loose ends are kind of neatly tied up. Things are left uncertain, and I think though it might not be a fully satisfactory story arc for some people, it could be read as kind of emblematic of your 20s, and how a film about your 20s isn't going to end with and they were married and lived happily ever after. It's still a time of uncertainty, and though you might have some things kind of half figured out, you're still going to be confused and scared, and probably struggling for money, and probably struggling in relationships. We've all seen Sex in the City, and they're in their 30s and they're still struggling with all these things. Anyways, speaking of being a really hot, successful girl boss and accomplishing things, I recently reached 100,000 subscribers. I put the glasses on because I'm actually too famous to talk to anyone right now, and I'm too famous to actually be observed. The paparazzi, please get that light out of my face. I want to say at the end, thank you so much. What the fuck? I'm really, really grateful, even though I'm still wrapping my head around it, and I know it's not a big deal for anybody but me, but it's still a big deal for me. So thank you very much for being here and for indulging this messiness, this youngness, this womanness. It's a bit crazy, but I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I hope you have a fun, messy, young time. No matter your gender, no matter your age, I hope you feel messy, and I hope you feel young tonight, in a fun way. Anyways, have a lovely day, have a lovely evening. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in my next video.